So, hello everyone. I apologize if I sound a little weird. It's because I have been sick for a few days, but it's all good. We don't we don't stop for nothing. So for today's training session, I wanted to go through a couple case studies. Last training session, I went through the 90% strat. If you haven't seen that one, please go to the announcements channel. It has been posted there. And basically, this is a follow up for the 90% strat. It's the DCA dip strategy, right? It's what is the most optimal way to play Illico? What is Illico's best strength, right? And its best strength is its predictive measures, but also its success rate. Excuse me. What do people in Illico know that nobody else does, right? Is that whenever there's a token, whenever there's a signal, there is a 90% probability of a token reaching a certain price, right? So we're going to go with the $100 example again. So again, in Illico, a token gets caught at $100. That means that you know that there's a 90% probability it's going to reach to $115 no matter what, because 90% success rate for 15% take profit, right? That means it doesn't matter how much it dips. You still can play that strategy. So this is what we'll be going through today. We'll be going through 4 cases here that I've already pulled up. So the first case we can go for is WOJAK. So WOJAK was caught on December 11th at 7:12 p.m., right? And immediately when you look at this chart, this it doesn't look very good, right? Clearly it was caught at almost the very top. It only went up by what, 5% after the signal. Not really much you can do with that, right? So what are you equipped with in this scenario, right? You're equipped with that 90% to 115, right? So it was Scott. Let's give a close approximate. So Scott over here. Let's assume it was Scott at that 2852 point. Okay, right over here. So let's calculate where our 15% take profit was. So now let's look for that 2852 on the right. If you're looking at the right of the chart, you're going to see 2854. Yeah, that's close enough. So what are we equipped with in Illico? We know that no matter what happens, no matter what, no matter how much time it takes, it doesn't matter. We know there's a 90% probability that this scenario happens here. You guys see my cursor, right? You see my cursor. You know it was caught at 2854, and you know that no matter what the noise is, because you guys can see there's a lot of noise here. A couple, a couple pullbacks for sure. I mean, I wouldn't even call this. I mean, were we in a? I can't really scroll out. Okay, but a couple retraces here. Consolidation. This I would call this consolidation, and it's just noise, right? We don't care about this because we knew that there's a 90% probability of the token reaching a 15% take profit. This 3284 level, right? What is another piece of information that's quite useful when playing the 90% strat? Market cap. 90% strategy works optimally, not optimally, let's call it conservatively on higher market caps. Clearly, that means you can DCA with a bit more liquidity, put a bit more liquidity into plays because the market cap is higher. Usually, right? Most of the time, a higher market cap is the significance of a more conservative token. Like, it doesn't mean it's not going to dump, but it's still a sign of a more low risk play, right? I don't know if I'm sharing my screen here. Let me share my screen. Let me share my screen here for everybody else. Hello, Big. I was just going through the 90% strat, and so as I was saying, the higher the market cap, intrinsically we all know that it is more of a low risk play. So in a low risk play, you kind of have more security, right? So you have more security in that 90% strat, meaning you can DCA a bit more while understanding that it's not going to dump, right? At least most of the time. So once again, it was caught at that 28.54 mark. And we knew that if, let's say, you drew out this chart and you drew out this little square here, you knew it was going to reach this point, this 32.84, right? 32.84 pips here, right? You knew this at least 90% of the time. It doesn't matter what all the noise is. It doesn't matter. So what could you have done? You could have DCA'd. So now here, I'm just going to remove this here, but you guys will see again, it was cut at 28.54. Let's go back to 28.54 and see how much it actually dipped. I don't think it dipped very much, but let's go take a look, right? Okay, let's do 28.48. So now we can see that it dipped around that. Let's see what the lowest point was. That 16% mark, right? To be conservative, right? Because in this case, you probably would have been waiting for that support level here, right? I can't really point to it here, but that support level. So this would have been a good DCA because you knew that support was close by, right? Especially if you zoom in here, right? You zoom in, you knew that support was, it basically almost hit support, right? You could call it support. So this was a good DCA play regardless, right? Because it was that support, and you knew that when you were down here, right? You were below, you were negative 15% on the play, right? You were negative 15% right here. What did you know? You know, what were you equipped with? That there's a 90% probability that it'll go to 15%. And what's 15%? 32.84, right? So if you remember correctly, 15% was around this level here, right? So once you guys take a look at this percentage here, 37%. So when we say 90% strategy for 15% take profit, excuse me, we're referring, we're referring not to face value, but what happens before that 15% is hit. So in this case, all you had to do was DCA at support, which is not something crazy, right? It's not something alien to anybody here. Everybody here is already a trader. So you guys know what support is. So two things you're equipped with. High market cap means relatively lower risk for a shitcoin, right? You knew that there was a 90% probability of reaching that 32.84 mark here on the right. And then it hits very close to support. So this is not a crazy DCA, right? It's not something that would have not happened. It was very probable. So instead of making 15%, you'd have made around that 30% mark. Of course, you have to be playing with a bit more liquidity, right? But in this case, it played out exactly as Illico predicted. Exactly, right? So we'll go to our next example here. So our next example, KOWE. Excuse me. Let's take a look here. So KOWE was caught at 5:25 a.m. on the 11th of December. Now again, this is the 90% strat. So what happens when it was caught? What happened here? Right? This doesn't look like much, but it actually dipped. Let me get a better point here. It actually dipped almost 20%, right? It was caught here at 5:25 a.m. You guys can see it dipped around that 20% mark. Once again, what were you equipped with? Especially if you're playing larger positions, the DCA strat is the best strat in the league, especially if you're playing with higher positions. So once it hit this level here, right? Let's go back to that 525 and let's find where our 15% range is. So 15% is right here, right? I'm just trying to find the good points. So that 2342 pips mark, right? And it dipped all the way down to 20%. Okay. So of course you're not going to catch the dip every time, right? You might buy a 10% dip, 15%, 20, 30, 40, and it might dip even more. But what matters is that position that you enter at that dip is by far the best decision you can take. This isn't even, this is like a no-brainer. I use the algo myself, and I don't see how you cannot be profitable using the 90% strat. Like you knew that when it dipped to 20% here, right? Let's go back to there. I lost the level here. 15%. So let's approximate at that 2389 pips mark. So you knew when it dipped down to 20% almost, right? This was the 15% mark. 2389. Let's find 2389. 2389. I'm just going through it. Boom. There you go. But here's the thing. I'm not going back on, historical data. Oh, just because it's been proven in this chart, I mean, it's a pattern that could be repeated. No, this is the Illico strategy that you could have played by the book. By the book. So instead of making 15%, you would have made conservatively around that 35 to 40% mark. Because you knew that no matter what, it was going to reach this 2389 mark. No matter what. No matter what. Obviously at a 90% success rate, but excuse me. You knew that no matter what, it was going to go back up to 2389. So there's people here that exited, many people, right? But not Illico, because Illico knew. So, anyways, so this is example number two. It would have played out if you would have just bought in the 15, 20% dip. Obviously, the bigger the dip, the nicer. But 15, 20%, especially when you're playing with higher liquidity, is what you should be aiming for, right? It's very similar, if you guys remember, with the training session from last week with Solarium. Solarium was at, I think, a 3 million market cap, around 3 million. So, of course, you were aping with a little more liquidity, right? So, even small movements down 5% is pretty drastic. Excuse me. So, like I said before, even movements 5% is drastic with higher liquidity plays. So 46% is unheard of. Is unheard of. This is all you have to do is follow the book. Set yourself a DCA point and follow the book. That's it. Very simple. This plays out 90% of the time. And it plays out 90% of the time because Illico's success rate is so potent. This is simple. It's not something it's not rocket science, especially if you're aping with more liquidity. So again, this would have happened in the KOWE play. So now we're going to go to the next one. So instead of making that 15%, you would have made around that 40, 35%. Right? Okay, so let's go to the next one. Points. Ah, this is a beautiful one. Absolutely beautiful. Okay. So immediately you guys can see here. Let's see. So it looks like we were in a uptrend. We had a very nice pullback here. Okay. So the 14th of December, the points token was called by Illico at 7:30 p.m. EST, of course. And then what happened? Did it hit our 15% mark? I don't think it did. I think it barely. I think it just scraped by. It just scraped by. It hit 18%, but let's assume it didn't, right? Because you know when you use Maestro, banana, shuriken, any of your tools, there can be delays, right? So we're going to assume it didn't. And it's not a horrible assumption since it really only went up, let's see here, 730. It really only went up on that, what, 19% mark? So just 4 points above 15%, right? So just way too tight. So we're going to assume it didn't. And what are the odds that you would have gone in exactly at the time of the signal, right? So this is a perfect example of the 90% strategy. Perfect. This is this is literally a beautiful chart. Beautiful. This is fantastic. Absolutely beautiful. And another point is that the market cap was a bit higher. So with that being said, right, it was caught at that 730 mark. So let's find the price of that 1080 range. Okay, and then let's find that 15%, right? So obviously, like I said before, we're not going to use this mark because it was a bit too tight, and this assumes that you got in within 10 seconds of the signal. So we're gonna be a bit more conservative, and we're gonna assume you didn't get in the second the signal is called, right? So let's find that 15% mark. Okay. So as you can see, excuse me, is at that 1239 mark. It's at that 1239 mark, right? Remember that 1239, right? So playing the 90% strategy, what do we know? Immediately when you get a token, obviously you won't have time to, chart this every single time, but you definitely could to get an idea of where to sell in terms of the chart, what's going on, because this I would definitely call it, this is noise, right? I mean, it's not really a pullback because it wasn't really at the peak. You could call this consolidation, right? So we knew that no matter what happened in between these 2 points here, the price would have reached 1239 here on the right. You guys can see for people watching the recording, 90% of the time. So remember this, 1239. Okay. So what was the cut? Again, 1080, I believe, right? Around the 1080 mark. Let's see here. 1080. Where is 1080? Here? Okay. So around here. Remember, what did we say before? 1289, right? We could just go check one more time to be safe. 1239, sorry, 1239. All right. Here's why this chart's beautiful. Why don't you take a look at what happened after the signal was called? It dipped 23%, right? It was caught at 1080 here. It dipped to 82.45. So you could have, quite frankly, played by the book and DCA'd at that 15-20% mark. Again, once again, no problem. Because when you were down here and it went to 23%, let's say you DCA'd at the 20% mark. Okay, so let's take a look at what would have happened here, right? Now we're down 23%. Okay, so let's assume you bought like, let's say 20%. So let's maybe put it up by a couple pips. Okay, so now we're here, right? If let's say we wanted to go in real time, let's say we're here. Token just dumped 15%, right? We're right here, okay? And we bought, remember guys, we bought over here and the token's down here. So what information are you equipped with? You know that no matter what, this token is going to 1239 90% of the time. You know that this 47% run is going to happen 90% of the time. There's a 90%, that means out of 100 signals, 90 of them will hit that 15% mark. So again, you would have aped at around that 20% mark and you would have made around 35 to 40% profit. Obviously, I'm referring to your second position, not the first position. Averaged out, you would have probably made around that 25 to 30% mark. But that's why you can't take the Illico 90% strat at face value because it isn't, right? Obviously, when you hear a 90% chance of a 15% take profit in shitcoins, you get laughed at. People will laugh at you. People laugh at us in Illico. Of course, 15% is a joke. But what nobody understands is that it isn't about 15%. It's about this point, 1237. It's about that price. You know that there's a 90%, you're down here, you know there's a 90% probability it'll reach this price. So again, this is how it would have played out. You would have bought at that 1080 mark, it would have went down at around 20%. Well, here it went down to 23%, but you could have DCA'd at, 15, which is around here, or 20%. And then you knew that no matter what, you were not selling until it reached at around that 15% take profit mark, which it did. And it only took, let's see here. I don't think it took that long. I think it took less than 1 hour is what I would have said, but that's not true. It actually took, let's see here, maybe an hour and 10 minutes, an hour and, let's see here, 7:30, 7:50, okay, an hour and, we'll call it an hour and 25. It took an hour and 25 minutes for the signal to be a win. So within this hour and 25 minutes, everybody's panicking, everybody's selling, nobody knows what they're doing. As you can see, the the dumps are not getting eat up that quickly, right? We tried to retest a couple of times, not really much there, but not you, not you in the Illico. You knew it was going to hit 1237, 1239. So you would have literally bought 10 again. Just a recap for anybody watching the recording. Bought 1080, DCA'd at that 15. We can just so I can show you guys, DCA'd at that either this mark here, 15%, or that 20% mark, right? As you guys can see, another thing is you guys, I'm just repeating myself, but you guys are all traders, so you guys know how to, the basics. What do we see here? Why would you have bought at 20% or around there? Why don't you look at the chart here on the left? You can see that there's quite a bit of support here. Not much, but something that you could work with, right? So not only would you have bought at 20% because there's a probability that that was your desired DCA entry, but this was also a support level at 20%. So it isn't alien to you to buy at that 20% dip. Because you can, after this recording, you could watch and say, well, Cezanne, why would I buy a 20% dip? Excuse me. Cezanne, why would you buy at 20%? Because number one, you need to have your predefined entries, right? You can't just randomly DCA. You need to have certain entries that are preset that you've already thought about. It can be consistently 15% or it can be 20%, 30, whatever. And then you also had support at 20%. So it really isn't alien to have DCA at 20%. So this was an actual viable play. Let's go back and see how much you would have made on your second position, of course. Around so it ran up to 47%. And your second position here at that 20%. Excuse me guys, I'm a little sick. Now that's why it may sound weird. So you would have bought at that 20% level and you would have made on your second position, you would have made conservatively around 35 to 40%. That isn't crazy. This is likely. That's how I use the algorithm myself. That's how people use the algorithm themselves in Illico. This is by far the best strategy in Illico if you are not waiting on, a galactic high or a solar high, right? Now, last example, right? ORDS. Let's take a look at this chart. This would have been a quick play. I believe this was a quick play, but this was a beautiful one at that. So it was caught at that 7 4. Let's actually take a look here. 7:43. So it's caught at 7:43 p.m. on the 15th of December. So it's caught right here, right? We can average out, excuse me, on a viable entry. So we'll take the top here. Okay. Obviously, you could have said, well, it wicked to, let's see, what is this? It wicked up to, what is this level? 56%, but we all know this isn't a viable exit at all. Like, because obviously we're also looking at the 1 minute chart, right? So let's let me just zoom in here. Let me get a nice zoom here, just so I can show you guys. So 7:44 p.m. Sorry, 7:44 a.m. Caught at that 37.44 mark. Okay, on the right. Let's take a look at how much it dipped. Okay. So again, all I'm doing is I'm going to find the lowest point after the 744 mark. Okay. It went down 30%. Okay, so it dipped 30%, right? Again, it was caught at 7:44 a.m. and it dipped at that 30% mark. So what would you have done once again? Guys, rinse and repeat. That's it, right? So you had 15 to a 20% dip, a DCA, or again, this isn't crazy, but you could have just waited until it hit support, right? And you know that support was around this let's see 23 mark to, let's just take a gander here. It was around this 22 mark to 25. So we already knew that support was around that 22 to 25 mark, right? It was within that range. So it isn't crazy for you to say, okay, I could have actually entered a position at, let me just go down here. Sorry, I'm just trying to get back down. Let's go back here. It isn't crazy to have bought a bit above support. It isn't crazy. Reg- you know, regardless of if you already have preset targets, support was around this level anyway. So it isn't crazy for you to have bought support at around this level. But to be conservative, we can say you DCA at around 20%. So let's find that 20% mark. Again, this is an approximate, it's not exactly, but let's find that 20% mark. So 20% around here. So 20% was 29.45, and let's find that 15% mark. Okay. So 15% was 42.86. Right? So what would you have done again? Rinse and repeat. DCA at 20% or 25 or 30. It's up to you. And once you're DCA'd, you hold that position. That's it. And you can DCA again because you know that there's a 90% chance of 15. So what were we at? 42, 44, I believe. Let's go check again. We were at, sorry, let's see here, 15. Let's call it 43, 43. Okay, so you're at 20%. You DCA'd at 20%. And again, all you did was followed the playbook. Zero emotions involved, right? 43, 43 is right here. Again, 40% up. This isn't alien, guys. This isn't alien. This is a process you can repeat over and over and over. Excuse me, 1 second. Just gotta blow my nose, guys. All right, I'm back. Sorry about that. So again, rinse and repeat. Rinse and repeat. That's it. So you would have DCA'd at your preset target, which is that 20% mark, or it could be 25 or 30. In this case, what you could have done was, because here's the thing, at the end of the day, no matter what, right? No matter what, there's a 90% chance of it reaching 15%. No matter what. It doesn't matter what happens, there's a 90% chance. Okay? So even if you don't get that perfect DCA to hit your target, as long as you're playing with 0.5 and above, guess what? You are still in profit. you're still in profit. So the DCA strategy isn't one that's absolutely necessary, but it's the one strategy to leverage Illico's success rate as optimally as possible. So you don't absolutely, so for example, because I know some of you may be thinking about this, so I'll gladly answer this question before you even ask it. Well, Cezanne, what if it doesn't dip to our 20% mark, right? Or let's say, Oxy has a predefined or preset entry at, I don't know, 40%, right? So he said, I'm not going to DC until it hits 40%. Well, it's very simple. You know that. Okay, it didn't hit that 40% dip, but as long as you are playing with zero point 0.5 and above, zero point 0.4, zero point 0.5 and above, to obviously to account for fees, guess what? There's still a 90% probability it'll hit 15%. So the DCA strategy is one to leverage this Illico success rate. But even if you do not play this strategy, it is not the end of the world when you're playing with a bit more liquidity. Definitely not. The DCA 90% strategy is to maximize your profits, right? It's a no-brainer. It is a no-brainer because you know that it's going to reach its 43 mark no matter what, 15% of the time, right? So if, let's say, you entered at the top and you said, okay, I'm not going to DCA unless it hits 30%, or I'm not going to DCA until it hits 35%. Okay, great, fantastic. What do we see here? It never hit 30. It never hit 30. Uh, sorry. I'm not going to DCA here unless it hits 40%, right? 40% dip. Well, guess what? Did it hit 40% dip here? No, it didn't. It seems here that it only hit around that 28% mark. So you wouldn't have actually been able to DCA here, but it doesn't matter. That's what we need to understand is even if you don't DCA or you don't buy the dip, it's not the end of the world because you're still going to hit that 15% mark 90% of the time. So the reason I'm saying this is so that anybody watching the recording, it's so that you don't actually have, like, I don't want you to stress about it or worry about it. It's not the end of the world if it doesn't reach your target. Do not force a trade. Have your preset targets before. Play your targets out. If they hit, fantastic. If they don't, that's life. But you know no matter what, there's a 90% chance of hitting this 43 mark. So as long as you're playing with 0.4, 0.5 and above, you're going to be in profit. So the DCA strat is really the strat in Illico you want to use to maximize your profit. Because you know, you're basically predicting the future. You are predicting the future. Illico predicts the future most of the time. So all you have to do is let Illico take the wheel. And that's it. So we're going to conclude here. I am not feeling, the best today. I would keep going, but um, I just wanted to make sure I got this out for you guys today, no matter what.